What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we are going to be going through and discussing those very confusing receiver rooms for Dynasty Fantasy Football. Think about those teams like the Green Bay Packers, the Chicago Bears, the Buffalo Bills, the Indianapolis Colts, all of those rooms where there's plenty of guys and not a lot of clarity. We're going to discuss that here on today's episode, but we're not going to be doing it alone. We actually have a guest here today, Garret Price from Dynasty Nerds. So let's get him into the building. We'll start talking about some of these receiving rooms and hopefully answer some of your guys' questions. Garret, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, dude. How are you?
I'm good, man. Hey, I appreciate you joining me today. I know it's been a little while since our last one. You're one of my favorite listens in the industry. You were one of my favorite guests that I had last year, so I'm very excited to have you back.
No, I appreciate you bringing me in. I remember doing a video with you last year, and it was the one where we drafted a best ball team, and I did you a great favor and took Jonathan Brooks, who ended up being hurt all season. So I was definitely super helpful there.
That video was one of my favorite videos we did all offseason. It was one of the best ones because we got all of those guys in there, but that team was one of the worst teams I think we've ever drafted ever. It came in about as low of a placement as you possibly could have had. It was horrible, but it was very fun. I'm going to do it again this year.
That's fantastic. That's how it goes, though. Usually it's tough with that many people building teams that many different ways and trying to do it all together. I think that's why NFL rooms have a hard time sometimes, honestly, where if you would just let one or two guys do their thing, you'd probably be fine. But all the different opinions, all the different voices, it makes it tough.
It's too many cooks in the kitchen, man. It just messed up the recipe. But look, there might be too many cooks in the kitchen in some of these wide receiver rooms. It is a little bit messy for some of them as well. But I want to start us really off with the Chicago Bears. And when I say receiving rooms, I want us to think about the tight end position as well. Because in today's modern day NFL, it feels like the tight end position is so much more of almost like an extended receiver position now for these NFL teams. And we've seen these guys get picked highly. And speaking of the Chicago Bears, guys like Colston Loveland, who are top 10 picks for them here in this year's draft, supposedly to be the Sam Laporta for Ben Johnson now that he's here in Chicago. But he gets there with already a tight end that I know you've been a fan of in the past in Cole Kmet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've been a fan of him in the past, right? And then you have guys like Odunze, DJ Moore, and Luther Burden as well. So really, when we're looking at this room, I think we both feel like DJ Moore is potentially the guy for now, but how are you feeling about this, having the guys like Odunze and Luther Burden in this room?
Yeah, I would say this is the hardest one. We look at all these rooms, and I feel like I have a good feel for a lot of these rooms on how I think the short term will work out in the long term. And I think you're correct. I think DJ Moore is probably the safest bet for this year. But long term, this is a really tricky one for me because I think the most talented player of the group is probably Odunze. But he also had somewhat of a disappointing year one. DJ Moore obviously was the better performer of the two last year. And then you bring in a whole new system, a brand new coach that drafts his guys, and he drafts two pass catchers in the first and second round. So there's just so many different directions that this could potentially go. And you're right. Even though Cole Kmet is not a good fantasy option long term, he's probably, at least in the short term, going to be annoying enough to not allow Colston Loveland to launch like we want him to. So it's a pretty big mess. When in doubt, though, I am going to go back to the talent. I think typically, especially with good head coaches, the talent does rise to the top. Whether it's their guy they drafted or not, they're going to look at what is my best opportunity to win. And I think long-term, Odunze is that answer. He's in his second year now with Caleb Williams. They've built up that chemistry. Look, there's a lot of different ways this could go, and it wouldn't shock me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the safest place to put your chips if you're playing Dynasty Fantasy Football.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. I mean, looking at last year, like you said, DJ Moore kind of led the way. He had 98 receptions, 140 targets, 966 yards, and 6 touchdowns. What that translated to for us fantasy football-wise was the wide receiver 16. Obviously, a very inefficient year from the Bears offense with, Caleb Williams. I think he did the best he possibly could. Some of the stories we've heard this offseason of him asking coaches to watch film with him is insane. Being at the NFL level and not having that type of leadership in the building. But a guy like Keenan Allen, not on the roster anymore. He had 121 targets last year. How do you see that, 120 targets being dispersed? Is that just immediately going to Burden and Loveland, or do you think that's going to trickle to everybody?
Yeah, rarely ever do all the targets when somebody leaves. Rarely ever do they all seem to go to one player. I think they're going to be distributed fairly evenly, but I think the person that will get the biggest bump is Odunze. They need that alpha type of receiver in this offense. And even though DJ Moore is a good player, a very good wide receiver, he doesn't profile as your traditional X. I think they would like to get that guy. Not that they can't operate without one. Amon-Ra St. Brown is not your traditional X, runs out of the slot. So they were able to make it work before in Detroit. But when you have a player like that and the things that he can do on a football field, I think they will probably go to him more so than the rest of the guys.
Yeah, I tend to agree as well, and I think the market kind of agrees with that too. When you look at like Keep Trade Cut, consensus rankings, Odunze is the guy who is ranked the highest. Right now, he's sitting there at wide receiver 20 on those rankings. DJ Moore is the wide receiver 32. Luther Burden's the wide receiver 34. And then as far as the tight ends go, Colston Loveland's the top 5 guy. I think when I'm looking at this, it feels like the market is kind of low on DJ Moore. I think he's potentially a player who can still be a buy at the moment, being there ranked at wide receiver 32. And at the same time, it kind of feels like he may potentially be a year from now or 2 years from now, the odd man out here in this wide receiver room. Do you kind of agree with both of those statements?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. When you look at that ADP, wide receiver 32, if you were to tell me that DJ Moore was a wide receiver 2 or better, I would say yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would easily project him to be a top 24 guy. And I think he will for the next couple seasons. I also believe that this is eventually going to be the kind of offense that can sustain multiple receivers inside of the top 24. So it would not surprise me if DJ Moore plays well or Luther Burden plays well, that we see one of those guys a couple years from now where Odunze is at wide receiver 13 and the other guys at wide receiver 19. That would not shock me in the league.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for me, Odunze, he's still a player that I am viewing as a buy. Wide receiver 20 feels like it's still a little bit low based off of where I can project him to be long term. This is still a player that I would have to argue that if he was in this year's wide receiver class, he's in conversations for wide receiver 1. I think he would have been there potentially above Travis Hunter, above Ted McMillan. He would have been the guy that probably is the number 1 wide receiver off the board. And he's a player that still feels like there's enough people in the community that aren't fully believing that last year was a result of a bad ecosystem. It feels like some people are still kind of knocking, the production. And overall, the production for Odunze wasn't bad. I mean, I want to go back I did it for DJ Moore, but Odunze had 101 targets, 734 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. Obviously, you want to see those touchdowns go up. But overall, 101 targets as a rookie. It's not often, rookies are coming in and still getting 100 plus targets.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think it's the same story that we're going to see from Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. Look, we've been so spoiled lately with wide receivers just coming in year 1 and just dominating. Sometimes it takes a guy a year or so. Now, sometimes they're just bust, and that's what it is. But based on what I saw on their college tape, and they did enough as rookies. I think the expectations were just so astronomically high for both of those players that it was tough to actually meet that. But we said ahead of time, we said that Odunze is on the JSN track, where it's probably not going to be until year 2 that we truly see what his potential is. People said that, but then what happened with JSN? After year 1, everybody's disappointed and down. First couple games starts off a little slow, and then what does he do? He ends up being wide receiver 9 on the season. I think we're going to see a lot of that out of Odunze, and now we're getting that probably out of Emeka Egbuka this year. So we're starting to see that trend of teams just loading up on wide receiver, even if they already have talent there, because they know how significant that is to a winning ecosystem.
Yeah. So the only guy we kind of haven't talked too much about is Luther Burden, and I kind of want to ask you a little bit about your thoughts on Burden. Right now, I know he's kind of dealing with the injury that kept him off of some of the rookie minicamp stuff. I saw Ben Johnson's, quote of obviously it's not good for him to be missing time right now because it's some of the most critical time for a rookie. How do you feel like that affects his rookie season? And then how are you looking at Burden here in this offense long term? I know there are a lot of people who are really excited about Burden.
The question with Burden is not talent and ability, because all you have to do is just watch a few clips and you can see really quickly the level of ability that he could possess. The problem at times was effort and attitude. And that was the hard part for me, is I wasn't sure if I was watching prime Debo Samuel or was I watching Jalen Reagor. And that's the hard part, is like there was a lot of Jalen Reagor that I saw in his game that I was like, man, that's scary, because I know that he's got the movement skills. I know he has the speed. I know he can do things in the open field. And with the right offense and the right system and the right quarterback, which it seems like he has, dude could be amazing. But that's the thing that we're not always privy to, is what is going on as far as his relationship with his teammates, what's going on as far as health, what's going on between the ears. We as dynasty analysts, we don't get to know these things other than what we're told by the media. So sometimes, it'll be like, oh man, you were way wrong on that player. And maybe that's true, but sometimes there's just external factors outside of their ability that cause them to have their career derailed. So I wish him nothing but the best. I had a lot of shares of Luther Burden as like a Devi guy and C2C guy. So I hope nothing but the best for him, but we're just going to have to see how all this plays out.
Yeah, man. I'm not going to lie. I'm fairly excited for Burden as well. I think this is a pretty good fit. I like the potential of him potentially being that slot wide receiver there for Ben Johnson long term. I kind of already said how I feel like it does feel like DJ Moore is the odd man out long term. Especially being at 28 years old, they could really flip this and go with Odunze, Burden, Loveland, and kind of let the guys of DJ Moore being 28, 29, 30 out the door, and Cole Kmet being a little bit older out the door. Not that he's necessarily old, but obviously, Loveland does feel like they drafted a guy to replace him. But look, I think this room is, a little bit confusing. I think there's a lot to love in this room, though. I would say I could argue that almost everybody in this room does almost feel like a buy at the moment. I think you can buy Odunze, you can buy Burden, you can buy more. And I think all of them have arguments as to value insulation long term. But I'm curious, your thoughts there as far as all of them being buys, and then kind of how you obviously you're in on Caleb Williams as taking this step forward next year,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm all into.
There. Yeah, I have a little more trepidation than you as far as saying I would be willing to buy all of them. I think Odunze is adequately priced, so I'd be willing to buy him if the cards fell right. DJ Moore, I would probably be willing to buy as a contender. Colston Loveland is probably adequately priced. It's Luther Burden. Right now he's already in the wide receiver 3 range. There's a lot of moving pieces there. And I just struggle with some of the things that I saw in college, not from an ability standpoint, but from a effort and ran a lot of like simplistic routes. He has the movement skills to run some very complex routes. So it's not that he doesn't have the ability. I struggle with him a little bit there. So for me, I don't think I'm willing to buy Luther Burden at that price.
Okay, yeah, and I'll kind of give you the names of guys right around him as well, and maybe it's going to drive your point home. But Luther Burden right now, like I said, that wide receiver 32 or 34 over there on Keep Trade Cut. The guys right behind him, Jayden Higgins is sitting there at 35, Jerry Jeudy at 36, Brandon Ayuk at 37, and you have Josh Downs at 38.
Yeah, for sure. The two guys right after him. I've drafted Jayden Higgins ahead of Burden in every rookie draft so far. So definitely him. Jeudy, I think, is a good contender by right now. We saw him finish as a wide receiver 1 last year. Obviously new quarterback, but Joe Flacco has some Jameis Winston in him as far as being willing to throw the ball deep, take chances, things like that. Brandon Ayuk's a tough one. I could go either way on him. Josh Downs, similar. I could go either way. So I think at least 2 spots down. I'd have to see who the guys right after that, but at least 2 spots down, I'd move them.
Fair enough. All right. Well, let's move on to our next team here. We're actually going to stay in the division. We're going to go to the Green Bay Packers. It feels like ever since Davante Adams has left town, it has basically been a question mark every single year since then. Somebody else has been supposedly the guy, and then they always seem to get another guy in the building. This year, obviously, they drafted Matthew Golden, their first wide receiver in the first round in a while. Jayden Reed also in this room. Rome Odunze, Christian Watson, even though, he's probably not going to play this year with that injury. And then you still have guys, everybody's favorite Dontavion Wicks. And then you got Tucker Kraft, who threw himself in the mix here this year as well. Jayden Reed led that room in 2024 with only 55 receptions. He was the leader of the room with 55 receptions and 857 yards, followed by Tucker Kraft, there with 50 receptions and 700 yards. But how do you feel about Matthew Golden being added? And do you think this is a room where he can come in and, I guess, take over immediately?
I don't. I think this is going to be similar to what we've seen the past couple years. And you have offenses like this at times that are good offenses. And the quarterback's going to put up a lot of yards, a lot of points, but trying to peg week in, week out who the guy is going to be tough. I do think Matthew Golden will be one of, if not the lead here, but is it going to be enough to truly say, like, I can trust him at some point in the near future as my wide receiver too? Because if you're drafting a guy in the first round, fantasy wise, or I think for the most part he's going closer to the early second, but you would expect them to be a wide receiver too for your fantasy football team or better at some point. And I think that's the tricky part, is especially with his play stylistically, he's probably going to be more of a boom bust player. So he'll have those 5 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdown games. And then he's going to have 3 catches for 21 yards. And you're like, dang it, that totally screwed me over this week. So I could see him being a better option in best ball potentially than your traditional dynasty league, where I think he might be harder to trust, harder to start every single week. So I think that's the hard part for me, is I think Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur are going to do a good job of distributing targets, not force feed a player. So I think this is going to be a little bit difficult to peg. If there was one guy that I would be in on and more than the others, though, it would probably be Tucker Kraft. Tucker Kraft would be the guy that I would be the most interested in this room. We saw him really take the reins over from Musgrave last year. Didn't give them back at all. Does some things a little bit differently than the receivers do there. He's got that big frame, very physical player. I like the way he plays. And at tight end, we don't need a stupid amount of targets in order for them to still be very successful. So I think if there was one player that I'm targeting in this Green Bay wide receiver, tight end core here, pass catching core, it would be Tucker Kraft.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, this is a player who, led the team last year in touchdowns, and I think that's something that can go, again here in 2025. And he wasn't even like a high touchdown volume type of guy. He only scored 7. Those numbers can go up, and especially if Jordan Love's a little bit healthier this year as well. I like him. I know there's some people that still think, Tucker Kraft benefited from a Luke Musgrave injury, but I'm with you. I think he took it over, and I think this is his room, moving forward. I don't necessarily think Musgrave is going to be as involved as some people think. I know he was kind of the first choice for them, but then it ended up not working out that way. But I also kind of agree with you on the Matthew Golden take as well. That's a player that I was a little bit lower on, I think, in my draft process than a lot of people in the community were. I still had, players like Egbuka over him. I still kind of liked guys like Luther Burden as a talent more than I liked Matthew Golden. The landing spot in the draft capital, it changed a little bit of that for me when it came down to post-draft rankings, but this is a player that I think people are very excited about. When you look at, those keep trade cut rankings as well, he is he's distanced himself a little bit from guys like Jayden Reed in this room, and he's the wide receiver 29 right now. Reed's 42. It feels very much like me, or to me, if I was going to be investing in any of the wide receivers in this room, I'm actually still very much in on the Jayden Reed train. This is a player last year who didn't get the snaps, and I don't know if I can confidently tell you he's going to get these snaps increased going into 2025, but he only had 64% or 63% of those snaps last year, but he's one of the most efficient wide receivers for fantasy points per game with the touches that he got. It just feels like there's still a little bit of an untapped ceiling with Jayden Reed. Very good route runner, can do a lot for this offense, but I still have the worries that, in those 2 wide receiver sets, they're going to throw Dobbs out there and they're going to throw Golden out there, and Reed still might be on the sideline.
Yeah, no, I think that's a real concern, and it's part of the reason I was a little bit worried about Golden as well. He's not a guy that profiles as like a good blocking receiver. So this whole situation for snaps and targets could end up being really messy. And just for me, I'd rather stay out of it. But I like your call on Reed. I think he was overpriced last year. But for me, it's more about what's the value on the player. Not necessarily I like the player or dislike the player. I just thought the value was a little too high last year. But now I think the market's overcorrected and now it's a little bit too low. And I would be more willing to take a chance on him than I would anybody else.
I agree. I'm gonna give you a couple questions here, and I'll let you make some predictions. First one is, who leads this team in targets this year?
Ooh, I am gonna go with Jayden Reed.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Dobbs leads this team in targets.
Ooh, okay.
And then for touchdowns, who leads this team in touchdowns, receiving touchdowns?
Tucker Kraft. I
I
think Tucker
agree.
Kraft will.
I agree. All right. Well, let's move on to this next team. I want to get into the Buffalo Bills. We kind of could have transitioned that a little bit because Jayden Reed is valued next to, one of the top wide receivers in this room, next to Khalil Shakir. But this room is Shakir, who did kind of have a small breakout last year. I wouldn't call it a full breakout. I still think that there's room to grow for Shakir as a receiver. But they also added in Keon Coleman last year in the draft. I would say a little bit of a rough rookie season for him from a production standpoint. They added Josh Palmer in free agency, Elijah Moore in free agency, Curtis Samuel's still there. And then obviously, I think one of the biggest talking points of this room is a little bit of the disappointment that we had last year from Dalton Kincaid when it seemed like everything was perfect for him to flourish. But I kind of want to ask you, when it comes to this room specifically, does this feel like there is a solution for Buffalo? Does their offense feel like they need that number one wide receiver? I know a lot of people wanted them to have it after Diggs left, but I think last year they were one of the best offenses in football despite not having the number one. Is this good enough, or are you still uncomfortable with this room?
Yeah, it's a really interesting team. I have been a very big Shakir supporter for a long time, drafted him in a lot of leagues. And but like I said, kind of the opposite of some of the other guys. It was a guy that I was gobbling up as much as I could, but now I think he's become overpriced probably a little bit. So I'm not as interested now in Khalil Shakir as I was before. But it does feel like a team where I do think they will eventually be trying to get that number one guy. I think they were hoping that that could be Keon Coleman. And I'm not saying it couldn't be, but one of the biggest problems I had with him as a prospect coming out was his lack of ability to be able to separate. He was good at the catch point. So I think he would actually really benefit from being more of that power slot. The problem is basically all of their other receivers are slot guys. So that's where it gets really tricky, is there just wasn't that role available for him. So I think long term, that's what would be the best fit for him as far as being an effective playmaker. And so I do see a likely scenario of them going after and getting somebody, not because they absolutely have to be successful and be a good offense, but I think when you look at some of these big games, and that's what they've always come up short, is in the big game, you need that guy that he can rely on to get open even when things aren't open. And so I think they could still be an amazingly effective offense without that player, just because it's Josh Allen. But I think long term, for their aspirations, they're going to need somebody that can just get open anytime he needs them open.
Yeah, 100%. And last year it felt like they did try and upgrade midseason with the Amari Cooper trade. Obviously, Cooper came in. It did not work out at all for Amari Cooper. 8 games played. He had 20 receptions on 32 targets for 297 yards. Really non-existent down the stretch, it felt like, for the Bills. And, they still just kind of leaned on Shakir. And maybe that was a little bit of him being one of the only options for them, or maybe it was a little bit of the talent. I was similar to you, where I was buying up a lot of Shakir last offseason, and I had him on a lot of teams. Now, that said, 76 receptions, 821 yards, and 4 touchdowns. In my PPR leagues, it felt like most weeks I was still only viewing Shakir as this flex guy that I could throw in. I knew he had a decent floor, but his ceiling wasn't that high either, really. And at the end of the year, finishing there as the wide receiver 37, 12.2 fantasy points per game is really what he was averaging. It still felt like, that's why I say when he kind of had that breakout, but it still felt like there was a lot that was still left on the table.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You want to see him get more into that 13 and a half, 14 type of range where you can confidently play him as like a high end wide receiver 3, low end wide receiver 2, week in, week out. And I think he could get there this year. I think there's enough room. But at what cost? Like, you're taking a lot of other very high ceiling players in that same range, where this guy you're best case scenario, you're getting a little bit more from. So I think that's what's tricky.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as that cost goes, he's the wide receiver 43 right now on Keep Trade Cut. Keon Coleman is wide receiver 46, so they're almost neck and neck. It feels like it's a coin flip for the community right now still on who they believe is the long-term number one. When you're looking at other guys in that tier, there's guys like Trey Harris, for the Los Angeles Chargers. There's guys like Cortland Sutton down there, a little bit older of a player, but obviously a high ceiling. Jayden Reed is down there, Jack Besh, Kyle Williams. There's a lot of young guys. And I agree with you. It feels like a lot of those players have higher ceilings, even though they might not have the floor that Shakir has right now at the moment. But speaking of players that left food on the table last year, Dalton Kincaid was a player I was so in on last year. I had him as a my guy going into the season for redraft. I had him on a ton of teams. I was very excited, and it just didn't work out. 13 games played, 75 targets, which is solid for the tight end position, but 44 catches for 448 yards and 2 touchdowns. When it came to fantasy points per game and what he was actually doing for our lineups, this is a dude who finished as the tight end 30 in fantasy last year, 7.8 fantasy points per game. It really wasn't what we wanted. How do you feel about Kincaid going here into year 3? And do you think now should we be out on Kincaid? He's the tight end 9 right now in community rankings. So is that too low? Is that too high? Where are we at with Kincaid?
So I don't want this to sound like a cop out, because I know it's going to. So this is my little disclaimer ahead of time. After Brock Bowers and Trey McBride in Dynasty, put guys in almost any order that you want within reason, and I'm probably going to be okay with it. So like Kincaid's not a hill I'm willing to die on either way. Like, do I think he's got some talent? Yes, absolutely. That's why he was drafted in the first round. Do I think the injury genuinely hampered him last year? Yeah, I genuinely do. But have we seen other players at the same position fight through that kind of injury and still be a very productive player, especially with a situation in a quarterback like Kincaid has had? Yeah. So this is really, like, it's weird to say for a guy that's only in his 3rd year, but feels like a borderline last chance for him. He's got to show something this year or he's really going to plummet.
Yeah, I agree. And it does feel weird. And it's funny because, we always talk about that tight end position being one that needs years to grow and blossom. But then also at the same time, we've had guys like Laporta who come in and kill it. Guys like Bowers who come in and kill it. McBride, as soon as he's on the football field, he's killing it. So like, it does feel very much like this timeline for tight end development has almost sped up over the last couple of years, similar to the wide receiver room. I remember there was a period of time just, 4 or 5 years ago where we were saying it was the year 2, year 3 breakout for wide receivers. And now it's like everybody's coming in and being productive immediately. So I kind of agree with you on Kincaid. I think I'm still willing to bet on Kincaid. I'm not out. I think I'm higher than, probably where consensus is right now. But if we had to play the game, this or that, how are you feeling about Kraft versus Kincaid?
I would take Kraft over Kincaid.
What about Likely versus Kincaid?
I'll take Kincaid.
Pitts versus Kincaid.
They're like the same guy. I'll take the guy that's been 1 year less of a disappointment.
Yeah, just a little bit less disappointing for Kincaid, but he might be on that track. David and Njoku.
No, maybe it's been 2 actually. That would be a situation dependent one for me.
Okay.
If I'm a contender, it would clearly be Njoku. If not, I'd probably it might just be David Njoku either way, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. He's kind of in this interesting bucket, and I agree with you. I recently went through and updated my tight end rankings. I went through and updated all my rankings on the channel, and my tight end one's got a ton of pushback. But I'm kind of in the same boat as you, where unless it's the top, 3 or 4 guys, I don't really care. You can order them however. I don't think that there's a big gap between even tight end 5 and tight end 13. Like it doesn't matter. It's team dependent. And one of my ones that I got pushback on was I put Evan Engram and Travis Kelce in the same tier as Kyle Pitts. And a lot of Kyle Pitts fans were saying that it was just egregious to have him with the old guys. But I'm with you where, like, if I need production right now, I'm not taking Pitts. I'll take Engram and Kelce.
I think sometimes I love Dynasty way more than redraft. I'm a Dynasty guy through and through.
100%.
But I think sometimes we have way too much of a long-term outlook on our Dynasty teams. Like, I'm really living, Rich talks about 2 to 3 year window guys, but for me, I've really become a 2 to 3 year window manager. Like,
Yes.
I really care about those years. And if you're going to help me within the next 3 years, yeah, you might be 5 years older, but I really care about the next 3 years. And that's how I'm going to evaluate my team.
I agree with you there. And honestly, I think sometimes I lean a little bit more towards the two. Like, just what can you do for me this year
Sure.
and next year? And that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Absolutely.
So I agree with you. I think if I have to make a bet on Shakir versus Coleman, I'm going to bet Shakir. But what are you doing with those two guys since they're so close?
I'll go Shakir as well. I've never been the biggest Keon Coleman guy. And then especially once he got labeled with the X and is going to have to deal with corners that are going to be really tough to separate from. It's just not a good situation for him.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's move on to Indianapolis. I want to talk about the Colts. I feel like this is a very interesting room as well. Obviously, a lot of them were very disappointing for fantasy last year, but I don't think that's the fault of the wide receivers. I think a lot of that was due to injury, obviously poor quarterback play from Anthony Richardson. Although going into 2025, how much better is it going to be? I think that's the big question that makes this still murky. But you have guys like Josh Downs, who's currently the most valuable player in this room. You have Michael Pittman, who I've been a fan of before in the past. Adonai Mitchell, who I liked in the draft process last year as well. And then you have their new addition here in the 2025 draft of Tyler Warren, who's going to be that tight end that it seems like for years we kept mock drafting and penciling tight ends to the Indianapolis Colts, but it finally happened, and they went and got their guy. Yep. But what would you say if I told you last year, all of those names we mentioned, those weren't even the leading receivers? It was Alec Pierce, who had 69 targets on 37 receptions for 824 yards and 7 touchdowns. He led the room by a mile, it felt like, last year. And I don't even think he's being ranked as like a top 5-6 receiving option on this team. Currently at the moment. But looking at this room, how do you feel about these guys and what is standing out really the most with the Colts?
So for me, I think all of the values have been so depressed in this room that, like, give me them all. Like, I will take all of these players on at this point, partly because I think they're talented players. I think there's a lot of talent in this receiving room, but partly I think there's a decent chance that if Anthony Richardson doesn't have his stuff together by week 3-4, they're gonna be quick to the trigger. And I could easily see Daniel Jones doing what Ryan Tannehill did for years, what Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith and Sam Darnold are doing right now. Like, I think he could revitalize his career and become a good enough quarterback to make this wide receiver and tight end room relevant again. So right now, I think these are all depressed assets. Like, it's funny because I know Green Bay is a lot sexier, and I was like, yeah, I'm kind of out overall. And this room's like way uglier, but I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And it's simply because what am I going to have to pay for all of these guys? We have some proven assets. Michael Pittman Jr. just 2 years ago was wide receiver 13. Like, he's a legitimate wide receiver in the NFL, and he was paid like it. Josh, he did not have Anthony Richardson at quarterback, was averaging over 15 points per game. That would have put him, if he would have played all games last year, he would have been a wide receiver 1 ahead of JSN. Like, he's a legitimate asset on this team. So for me, I think they're like one of the best. Like, you know, sometimes you can run to the thrift store and you see like absolute junk. And then another time you'll go and be like, holy cow, look at all these things I got for dirt cheap. Like, that's what the Colts feel like right now, is just an absolute treasure hunt that you could find.
Yeah, 100%. And you go back to that cost, like you said, you know, the Packers wide receiver room, we were talking about guys like Golden being ranked top 30. Jayden Reed was a top 40 guy. When you look at this room right here, Downs is wide receiver 40. He's the same as Reed, and Reed was the wide receiver 2 supposedly in that room as far as rankings go. Michael Pittman's outside of the top 50 right now on Keep Trade Cut. He's being left for dead, it feels like, and I think a lot of that was to the back injury last year and the bad quarterback play. But I'm with you. I was a Michael Pittman fan. I still think he's a player that can give us some more good years. He's 27 still. There's still a little bit of time left, but the guy that makes me the most interested is Adonai Mitchell. And Adonai at wide receiver 65 right now, being valued as low as he is, I want to say some of the names in his range just so we can put some names to it. But It's A.D. Mitchell, Jalen Royals, Romeo Dobbs, Tank Dell. Like, these are the names there with him. And while some of those names sound sexier, I think, at the moment, even guys that have name appeal like Tank Dell, as unfortunate as it is, I don't think Tank Dell is going to be the same guy anymore after that injury, and especially with the additions that they had to that room. But Adonai Mitchell feels like the ultimate wide receiver lottery ticket, especially if they can start using him in the right type of situation and having that consistent quarterback play. And I'm going to push a hot take here just a little bit. I don't even think Anthony Richardson comes in week 1 as the starter. I think it's Daniel Jones from week 1.
That could be true.
And if it's
That could
Daniel Jones
absolutely
from
be
week 1, we might have already seen it wraps for A-Rich, at least as a Colt. So I'm very interested in it. We've seen Daniel Jones have guys like Wan'Dale Robinson hyper effective from the slot. That could mean good things for Josh Downs. Obviously, he still, has a decent arm. It's not entirely accurate most of the time, but I still think he has a decent arm. He can get guys like Pittman and Mitchell deep. But I'm definitely interested in Mitchell at Price. I think he's a player that I'm willing to take a couple of these future thirds and just sprinkle him in some trades just to see if I can get some AD Mitchell on my team.
No, I like it. I was a big fan of his tape. Really disappointed last year with how everything worked out. I think obviously he's got to take some of that blame, but I do think that there was a lot with just the quarterback play. The offense was just doo-doo butter.
Yeah, 100%. And what about Tyler Warren? Because Tyler Warren, we didn't really talk about him. Obviously, he's the new addition here. Do you think that Tyler Warren is going to be heavily involved? I know he was drafted very highly by dynasty managers this year, especially in those tight end premium leagues, because of how much we like the tape there at Penn State. But do you think he's a player that maybe the hype is a little bit more than what he's actually going to produce for us here in this situation in Indianapolis?
He's a tough one to evaluate. It's honestly, I think it comes down to Shane Steichen. When you look at what Tyler Warren did best in college, it was being a chess piece, like lining him up in unique formations, putting him in unique spots, giving him the ball in unique ways. And that's how he really thrived. If they're going to use him as a traditional tight end, then I don't think things are going to be super great for him. So it's all about the creativity for Tyler Warren, I think, because Colston Loveland, yeah, you can line him up as a big slot and he's going to find great success. I think Tyler Warren would be okay there too, but to really maximize his potential, you've got to move him around, use him in unique ways. So hopefully they're able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. If it came to like Tyler Warren and Downs, you have to invest in one of these receiving options for the Colts. Are you going Downs or are you going Warren?
I think because of the price, I would go down. I do think, like everything being equal, I think Tyler Warren will be the better player for fantasy at his position. The cost it's gonna take for me to do that, I think I would rather have Josh Downs.
Yeah, I think Downs is the player for me that feels the safest. It feels like if you were to label anybody in this room partially quarterback proof, it feels like it's Downs. I feel like he's still going to get his, and he's the player that I like the most here. But are you interested at all in an Alec Pierce? I said he led last year. Does he interest you at all, or are you just out?
Fun for best ball, but for Dynasty, nah, I'm going to pass.
I agree. Let's go to New England. I want to talk about the Patriots because they just added some new additions in that wide receiver room. Obviously, new coaching staff here as well. But this year, adding Kyle Williams in the NFL draft, in free agency, you add a guy in Stefon Diggs coming off of the ACL tear, guys that we had before in Demario Douglas and Kayshon Boutte, but you also have guys like Jalen Polk and Javon Baker who were drafted last year as well to be the new wide receivers in this room. And 1 year later, there's a new coaching staff and they're already getting new guys in the building. Not even including, Hunter Henry kind of was the best receiving option in this room last year. He led everybody with 97 targets. He had 674 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think the thing was, obviously this needed an ultimate just renovation in the wide receiver room. And it seems like they're trying to do it with the Diggs and Williams move. But do you think this is enough? And if not, what do we still need here in New England to be comfortable?
I feel somewhat similar to kind of what I said about Buffalo, that I think the true wide receiver one for this team within the next couple of years is not currently on the team. I think they're probably going to be adding a legitimate playmaker for that position. But I like Stefon Diggs short term. I think he's a very sneaky, very inexpensive contender buy right now. It's not going to cost you a lot, but he's going to be able to do some nice things for Drake May. And I do like Kyle Williams. I think he's going to profile as a really nice wide receiver 2 for an NFL team long term, more like a fantasy wide receiver 3 more than likely, but he's got the ability to make some big plays, some good route running. I do think this will eventually be a good offense, but I think it's going to take a couple of years, and I think they're still missing that key cog.
Yeah, I think Diggs is probably a player that I'm still interested in. I'm notorious for being a Diggs guy, though. I've been a Diggs guy since he was drafted to my Vikings. So I've been a Diggs guy for a long time, but I'm still rooting for him. I think he's a player that, assuming he's ready, week one and healthy, I think he's a player that's going to be leaned on very heavily. He may not be very efficient, but I think he's going to be probably the target leader in this room, at least in 2025. I do like Kyle Williams long term. I think he's a player that if I had to invest in any of these guys moving forward, he's the one I'm investing in to put on my roster. But when I'm looking at the rest of the guys, and maybe it's not even, maybe the answer is none of them, which is a very valid answer. But Jalen Polk, Baker, Booty, and Douglas, there's probably still going to be some targets that get distributed around to these guys. And all of these players are fairly close in value. It seems like they're all being bucketed pretty close to each other for the most part. Are you going with Douglas? I know he's been the popular guy, but do you still have hope for guys like Polk and Baker?
Very little hope for Polk and Baker. I remember Polk getting drafted, and I was like, we're going to take him that high? Really? I am very shocked by this. So I never understood that one. It didn't make a lot of sense to me personally. I could see a scenario where Butte is the guy, but I would lean Douglas still. I think he's the most explosive of those guys. And I think we could see him still operate out of the slot and do some things. But I think more than likely the wide receivers that you're gonna care about are more or less not on the roster right now.
Yeah, and maybe that's just guys that they go and get in 2026 or 2027. Maybe this is a team that's not good enough and they land Jeremiah. That would be pretty interesting. Or Ryan Williams. That would be interesting with Drake May. I'm trying to pull up Diggs here last year because what Diggs did last year was still pretty good. I think a lot of people kind of had written him off as well a little bit, getting moved on from Buffalo. But he came in, he averaged 15.2 fantasy points per game last year. Obviously, it wasn't very long. He only played in a few. It was week 8 there when he got injured. And then it was pretty much done for the rest of the year. What do you think production-wise? Like, is this still a player that you think has that type of high-end production still in his repertoire? Or do you think this is a player that age is catching up, the injuries catching up, and maybe we're going to see a lesser version, but it's still going to have some value?
I think he's still going to have some value. I don't know that we're going to see him quite put up, wide receiver 1 numbers like he was on pace to do last year. And we saw him do in previous stops in Buffalo and Minnesota. But I think this is still a very savvy player, a good route runner. And we'll see. But everything I'm seeing on tape right now, he's moving well. He looks good. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt for now. And I think he could still give you the low end wide receiver 2 numbers for another year or two.
Agreed. And I think he's the best buy in this room at the moment. He's bringing valued right now as the wide receiver 62. It's below guys like Rashid Shaheed, below guys like Xavier Leggett, Darnell Mooney, even guys like Cooper Kupp. I think I would personally take Diggs over all of those guys. Do you agree with that for the most part?
If I'm a contender, absolutely. As a contender, I would take him above all of those players.
Yeah, he feels like probably one of the better buys that we've talked about maybe today. Hunter Henry interest you at all or no?
He's the perfect, I'm in a startup. I was just constantly going best player available, and now I'm in round 14 and I haven't drafted a tight end yet, and I'm just gonna settle because that's the thing. Realistically, is he going to be that much drastically different than the tight end 9 this year? Probably not. He's probably going to be within a half a point or so of a tight end 1. So I think he's a great, oh crap, I don't have anybody else. I need like a desperation break glass in case of emergency guy. He's the perfect guy for that.
Yeah, I mean, he was the tight end 12 last year, finished there. Obviously, health played a role in that, but points per game wise, he was only a half point behind Kraft, about 0.8 points behind guys like Engram and Freiermuth, who I think are all being valued higher than him at the moment. He does feel very much like the unsexy, like break glass. Let's get this guy on the roster, and I think I can plug him in most weeks, at least at the moment. And maybe with guys on the roster like Polk and Baker and Douglas, like maybe none of them is the answer, and the answer is Hunter Henry.
It probably is, honestly.
Fair enough. Let's go to Denver. I have this wide receiver room as one to talk about, and not because of Courtland Sutton. I think he's very, very clearly the number one wide receiver here. But when you look at the guys behind him right now, I do think this is an interesting room because you have guys like Marvin Mims, Pat Bryant, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, who flashed last year, and I don't know if there's a clear number two even going into this season. Last year, obviously, Mims kind of had more of the yards. Vele had some more receptions. Troy Franklin was a guy that I liked that ended up not doing much. But how do you feel about those guys at the moment? Mims, Bryant, Franklin, Vele, and how are you kind of projecting this to shake out here in Denver?
Long term, I think it's Mims and Bryant for me. I really like Mims. I mean, last year, according to PFF, from weeks 11 through 18, so kind of that second half of the season, on their grading scale, how they rank receivers and how they perform, he had the fourth highest PFF score in that range. The only guys he was behind, Puka Nacua, Drake London, and Mike Evans. Like, he was an elite company that second half of the season. He was winning consistently. And Sean Payton was like, you know what? That's on me. I should have figured out ways to get him the ball sooner, and I just didn't. He's going to continue to be more involved in our offense. So what he did at the end of the last year has me on board, and he's just so deep. I mean, look, even if he only ends up, you're like, oh, he didn't do anything close to what he did at the end of last year, and where he was, a fairly elite option actually. Yeah. And he just finished as wide receiver, 39 on the season. Okay, well, what's he on keep trade cut right now, in the 60s?
Yeah, I mean he's wide receiver 63. At least that's what I have right now, and that's still down there where Diggs was, where I was telling you Shahid and some of those other guys.
Yeah. So I mean he's stupid cheap, and I like Pat Bryant. There was enough on tape to tell me like, hey, there could be something here. They used the third round draft capital on him, and when you look at the contract situation, Courtland Sutton could be gone next year. So if they see enough out of this guy, he profiles as a very similar style player. He could very easily hop into that role. Now, do I have supreme confidence that he will? No, but at the cost, I'm willing to take that type of risk. I think those are great risks to take later on in your drafts or as extra trade chips.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to throw a little bit of extra context in here with Mims as well. It was the tale of two halves last year. All the way up to week 9. I mean, we were seeing games of 0, 2, 1 points. Like, that's what Mims was doing at the beginning of the season. Then at the end, games of 13, 19, 30 points in your championship week. If somehow you were like, the wheels have fallen off and I'm forced to play Marvin Mims and you got 30 points, you might have won your championship. Like, that's just the way that it went. But I do like him. I think he's my pick as well. I do kind of agree with the way that this is being ordered right now by the community, with Bryant there as the third option and Franklin as the fourth. As much as I liked Franklin, I hope that he kind of would have came in and brought in some of that connection that he had with Bo Nix, but it just didn't seem like it ever clicked. But, it is what it is. I think right now when I'm looking at this room as well, it feels like Mims took a little bit of a step last year, and we're hoping that he can keep, taking that step this year. But they also did bring in a free agent in Evan Engram, and Evan Engram is a player who's probably going to see, my assumption would be 100+ targets in this offense with Sean Payton as the Joker tight end. And it does make me question, how much of a step can Mims make if they're bringing in another 100 targets at the tight end position, even though he's cheap and you want to take that bet. How likely is that to happen with Evan Engram here?
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind. And you're right. The Joker position potentially going to Evan Engram would be huge, right? Last we heard it was going to be between him and a guy like RJ Harvey. With the news of J.K. Dobbins being brought in, it sounds like there's probably going to be Evan Engram on the field more often. So I'm guessing that's going to probably go to him, which is going to put him in a really unique position to get a lot of opportunity to score points. So I think you're absolutely spot on. I see Evan Engram probably being a top 5 tight end this season.
Okay, I'm with you there because I was going to say, and I put it out on X the other day, and I said that I thought Evan Engram has dark horse tight end one potential this year. Like, I know there's guys like McBride and Bowers, and yes, those are the likely guys that just end up finishing at. But if you're looking at a dark horse player, somebody that can actually, really surprise you, I think it's Evan Engram. He's a player that I'm very excited about this year, and you can get him very, very cheap. He's currently ranked as the tight end 15 on Keep Trade Cut. And we're talking about a player that has top 5, top 3 type of upside this year and maybe for the next 2 years because the contract was a 2-year deal where a lot of that is guaranteed money. Is he a player that, would you prioritize him on your teams in this offense, or is he kind of like if you can get him at a value, you'll grab him, but you're not prioritizing?
If I'm a contender and I need a tight end, I'm probably prioritizing him because the only tight ends that are relatively inexpensive that I have some real confidence in this year would probably be Evan Engram and Jonnu Smith. So chances are one of those two is already owned by a contender. So I'm going pretty hard after the one that's not.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to get a guy that you can trust to any extent. You need as much as I say I don't really care after tight end 3 or 4. I still need somebody in that spot to at least get me that 11, 12 points a game. And so I want to get at least one of those two guys on my team.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. But what I do like about this room, like I said, I think Sutton's established. Engram's the sneaky guy, and I think Mims is the upside, the cheap upside shot with Bryant as well. I'm going to ask you too, just on Sutton, because I do want to ask this one question. He's kind of at this age now where in Dynasty, at 30 years old, because he's going to be 30 at the start of the year. At 30 years old, it feels like your perceived or the perception of your value just continuously drops off a cliff. It just gets lower and lower every single season. Is he a player that if you have on your roster at the moment and you're not rebuilding, obviously if you're rebuilding, you need to be selling. But if you aren't rebuilding, are you just riding until the wheels fall off?
Yep. That's kind of where you're at with a guy like him at this point. Very solid player. You're not going to get much in return anyway. And honestly, we were talking about it earlier, living in that 2 to 3 year type of window. If you're a contender, I have no problem going after some of these guys. I remember in one of my leagues, this would have been 4 seasons ago now, at least 3, if not 4. I gave a first for Mike Evans, and I'm trying to remember the exact deal, but basically it wound down to be a first for Mike Evans as a contender. So my first was late. And some people were like, whoa, he's 28. Well, he's given me like wide receiver 1 seasons for the past 3 or 4 years now. So like, I think sometimes we get over in love with the youth and the longevity. And sometimes you just need guys to help you win a ship. And right now, Courtland Sutton, you feel okay if he's your wide receiver 2. You feel good if he's your wide receiver 3. But if he's your wide receiver 4, which right now you're only having to pay wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 type prices, like you're feeling great as a contender.
Yeah, I actually was in a very similar situation in one of my leagues. I was defending champion coming off, and I was actually doing the reverse. I was selling Sutton for a late first. I was getting my first back from a manager that I had sold it to later. So I still was going to be late, but everybody kind of did the same reaction. Whoa, but why would you give a first for Courtland Sutton? And then a year later, he does that with Bo Nix, and everybody's like, oh, maybe it wasn't as bad as we thought it might be. But
Yeah.
it's the same thing, everybody loves the young guy, the pick, but when you're getting those points in your lineup, maybe it's not so bad after all.
Yep. It's seasonality, in the off season, nobody wants these old guys. Saquon Barkley's worth nothing, it doesn't matter. And then you get into season and you're like, I could use 22 points a game on my team.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm going to take us to one more team because I have one more in the notes, and we'll make this one a little bit quicker because I think this conversation isn't as lengthy. But we'll go to the Tennessee Titans. Right now, that room is Calvin Ridley. And then with the addition of Cam Ward, it's a bunch of new names there. Alec Iamaner, Xavier Restrepo, Shamir DK, Tyler Lockett. These are the names that are kind of fighting for that wide receiver 2, 3, 4 slot. And you also have Chigakonkwo in this offense. With Cam Ward here, is there anybody of those young guys outside of Ridley? Because I think we probably both agree that Ridley's going to be the number one guy.
Yeah.
It's who of these young guys is the guy that you want to bet on?
So it's interesting. This feels somewhat similar to the Houston Texans a few years ago, where you look at their room and you're like, who are all these guys? Nico Collins and Tank Dell, and then you had some other guys that were there. I'm blanking on some of the names. The kid
Robert
from
Woods
Alabama
was there as well. They had a
yeah,
Mechie.
Mechie. That's who I'm thinking of. Mechie. There were different guys like that, and I was like, you know what? I'll just, for the cost right now, I'll just take them all and kind of let it sort itself out. And that's kind of how I feel about this room. The guy I liked the most personally as a prospect was the guy they didn't even draft, was Xavier Restrepo. I thought he was really disrespected by not being drafted. I thought he was one of the best route runners in the class. Really, really solid hands. Only had 2 drops the entire season, despite being peppered with targets. And then he ended up on the same team as his former quarterback. So he's been kind of disrespected, under recruited, everything his entire career. This could easily still fall in line with that. And we've seen plenty of wide receivers that have been undrafted guys that have ended up being something, Victor Cruz, Adam Thielen. So it's not unheard of for somebody like that. But if you're an AO Manor guy, if you're a DK guy, like, I have no problem with that. I think all of these players are just so incredibly cheap. I'm seeing these guys go in your rookie drafts 5th round, undrafted. Like, whoever's available, sure, I'll pay that price tag to potentially get the wide receiver 1 or 2 long term for Tennessee. Do I expect it? No, but I also didn't expect Nico Collins to be as incredible as he was, or Tank Dell to be incredible as he was for the short time that he was. So at least give me the shot with a young, talented quarterback that should make the guys around him better.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm with you as well. Like, when we do all of our rookie drafts in the leagues that I play in, we do them immediately after the NFL draft. Like, Monday comes and we're starting up those drafts. That's just the way that we like to do it. We have guys begging to start it up on Saturday. Like, they like, we already saw the first couple rounds. Let's just start it now. But I had a lot of those guys. Restrepo go undrafted in my rookie draft. DK undrafted in the rookie draft, and we're taking 50 rookies in these rookie drafts. So like, it just felt like there was a lot still here to be desired, and I think a lot of that is because of the lack of proven talent here. And it's funny because they do bring in Lockett, who is proven, but it feels like he's the guy that I don't even acknowledge in this receiver room. Do you kind of feel the same way, where like Lockett is a guy you don't care about here?
Yeah, I've forgotten at times that he's there. He feels like the Robert Woods of this equation, if we're gonna keep relating it to
Houston.
the old Texans. Like he's probably at the end. Will he have 2 or 3 games where you're like, oh, Tyler Lockett's there? I forgot. Good for him. Like, but for the most part, I think this team knows they're in rebuild. They want to see what they have in these young guys, see if there's anything to hang their hat on, because they know that they're going to be going after that position probably pretty heavily next year.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm with you. I think Restrepo is the guy that I would, if I have to pick one of them, and I can only pick one of them in this room outside of Ridley, it's going to be him, just because of that rapport that he has with Ward. But I would probably rank it, for me, Restrepo, DK, I Manor. Like, that's probably the way I would go. I want to ask you about the tight end room as kind of the last question here for the Titans, but they do have Chigakonkwo. He's kind of been this athletic guy that people have had some excitement before in the past. With Cam Ward here, are you, a little bit more optimistic with Okonkwo? Do you think there's room for a bounce back? Or do you think a guy like Gunnar Helm, who they drafted in this year's draft, is going to really push for a starting role here long term?
I liked Gunnar Helm. I know his measurables weren't great, but remember, he literally got injured during the 40. So I thought his receiving profile was actually really nice. I thought he moved pretty well. I thought he showed some nice athleticism, plucked the ball pretty well. So I did like Gunnar Helm. Chigakonkwo's obviously got the first crack at it. If I had to put my money on any of it, though, I don't think either one is going to be super fantasy relevant. And I think their tight end of the future is not on the team.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Well, I think that's it. We did talk about those 7 rooms. Hopefully, answered some of these questions that people are feeling about these wide receiver rooms. Like I said, a lot of these are murky. There's not a lot of clarity. There's also a lot of ways you could look at these rooms, and hopefully we gave people some stuff to think about so they can kind of clarify these rooms for themselves. I appreciate you, Garret, for joining me today. Where can some of the people find your stuff? I'm sure they know where to find you at, but just in case they haven't, where can they find you at?
Yeah, absolutely. They can find me on X at Dynasty Price, and all of my work is with Dynasty Nerds. So you can find me on the Nerds podcast, YouTube page, all that good stuff.
Yeah, strongly encourage checking them out, guys. I myself have been a consumer of the Dynasty Nerds for a long time. Been a long time GM film room guy. Go check out their stuff. They help me. They're gonna help you guys. So I strongly recommend them. If you are tapping into this channel for the first time, this is your first time here, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. We're going to keep growing. We just passed 5K. We're going to 10. Just going to keep moving this thing forward, and go join our free Discord. But with all of that out of the way, we have nothing else for you guys today, so we'll see you on the next episode. Until then, peace out.